The whistle screamed through the darkness like a dying animal, and Georgia Novak pressed her face against the cold glass of the train window, watching Fort Worth fade into nothing but scattered lights and broken promises. She had lived 20 years in that town, every single day of her life until tonight, and now her father had decided she needed to disappear because she had dared to speak her mind about the corruption eating away at their family business. The year was 1882, and women who questioned their fathers were sent away to distant relatives who might teach them obedience. Georgia's crime had been discovering that her father, Richard Novak, had been selling watered-down whiskey to the saloons and cheating ranchers out of their honest earnings. When she confronted him, he slapped her across the face and told her she would be on the midnight train to Kansas City by week's end. That week had passed faster than summer lightning, and now here she sat in a cramped passenger car, her small trunk stored overhead, her heart breaking with every mile that separated her from the only home she had ever known. The train car smelled of tobacco smoke and unwashed bodies. A woman in the seat across from Georgia rocked a crying baby, trying desperately to soothe the child. An old man snored loudly near the front of the car, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Georgia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried not to cry. She had cried enough over the past week, enough that her eyes were permanently red-rimmed and swollen. Her mother had died when Georgia was 12. And since then, her father had become harder, meaner, more focused on money than on anything resembling love or family. Georgia had tried to be the daughter he wanted, but she could not stay silent when she saw him hurting good people. The train lurched, and Georgia gripped the armrest. She had never been on a train before tonight. The motion made her stomach queasy, or perhaps that was just fear. Her aunt in Kansas City was a stern woman she had met only twice, both times when Georgia was very young. The letters her father had shown her from Aunt Beatrice made it clear that Georgia would be expected to work for her keep, helping with the boarding house her aunt ran. There would be no sympathy, no understanding, just hard work and harder discipline until Georgia learned to keep her mouth shut and her eyes down. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, someone was moving through the car. Georgia blinked her eyes open and saw a tall figure making his way down the aisle, checking each passenger carefully. He wore a worn leather coat, dusty boots, and a hat pulled low over his face. When he reached Georgia's row, he stopped and looked directly at her. "Miss Novak." His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. Georgia's heart hammered. "Who are you?" The man removed his hat, revealing a face that was younger than she expected, probably only a few years older than herself. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray that seemed to catch what little lamplight filled the train car. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, thin and white, that gave him a dangerous look. "Name's Austin Thorne. I work for your father's freight company." He said this quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was paying attention. "Or I did until 3 days ago when I quit." "I don't understand." Georgia straightened in her seat, suddenly very awake. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because what your father did to you ain't right." Austin's jaw tightened. "I heard him talking to his foreman, bragging about how he got rid of his troublesome daughter, how you would not be causing him any more problems. I have been working for Novak Freight for 2 years, Miss Novak, and I have seen enough to know you were telling the truth about his business practices." Georgia stared at this stranger, this cowboy who had apparently thrown away his job for her sake. "That still does not explain why you are on this train. I am getting you off it." Austin glanced toward the front of the car. "Next stop is a water station about 20 miles out." Train stops for 15 minutes to take on water. We get off there, I have horses waiting, and we ride back to Fort Worth. Are you insane? Georgia's voice rose slightly, and the woman with the baby looked over. Georgia lowered her voice to an urgent whisper. My father will kill you. He will kill both of us. Your father is a coward who preys on people who cannot fight back. Austin's gray eyes met hers steadily. But he does not scare me. What scares me is letting a good person get sent away for doing the right thing. That is not the kind of man I want to be. Georgia felt something shift in her chest, a strange, fluttering sensation she had never experienced before. This man, this virtual stranger, was willing to risk everything to help her. She did not understand it, but looking into his eyes, she saw something she had not seen in a very long time, genuine kindness. Why, she whispered, you do not even know me. Austin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was even softer than before. I know enough. I know you stood up to your father when no one else would. I know you cared more about what was right than about keeping the peace. And I know that if I let this train carry you away without doing something, I would never forgive myself. The train whistle blew again, a long, mournful sound that seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. Georgia looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. They were small hands, soft from a life that had been relatively easy until now. If she went with this cowboy, there would be no going back. Her father would be furious. There might be violence. She might end up with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. But if she stayed on this train, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. She would become like her aunt, bitter and hardened, all the life crushed out of her until she was nothing but duty and resentment. Georgia looked up at Austin Thorne. All right, she said. I will come with you. Something flickered in Austin's expression, relief maybe, or perhaps satisfaction. He nodded once. Pack light. Bring only what you can carry easily. We will be riding hard once we hit the ground. He moved away then, taking a seat several rows back where he could watch both Georgia and the door. Georgia reached up and pulled down her small trunk. Her hands shook as she opened it and began sorting through her belongings. She had packed hastily under her father's watchful eye, throwing in dresses and undergarments, a few books, her mother's jewelry. Now she had to decide what mattered most. She took her mother's wedding ring and a small locket that held a picture of her mother as a young woman. She took a dress that could handle hard riding and some basic supplies. She took the small amount of money she had managed to hide from her father, bills and coins sewn into the hem of a petticoat. Everything else she left in the trunk. Let her father get it back when the train reached Kansas City and the trunk was returned unclaimed. Let him know she had escaped. The train began to slow, the rhythm of the wheels changing from a steady thunder to a more measured beat. Georgia closed the trunk and shoved it back overhead. She wrapped her essentials in a shawl and clutched it to her chest. Her heart was beating so hard she thought surely everyone in the car must be able to hear it. Austin stood and made his way back to her. Stay close to me. When we get off, do not look back, do not hesitate. The horses are tied about 100 yards from the station. We get on and we ride. Georgia nodded. She did not trust her voice. The train shuddered to a stop, brakes squealing. A conductor walked through calling out, "Water stop, 15 minutes, passengers may disembark to stretch their legs but stay close to the train." Austin offered Georgia his hand. She took it, and the moment her fingers touched his, she felt that strange flutter again, stronger this time. His hand was rough and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living, but his grip was gentle as he helped her to her feet. They moved toward the door with a few other passengers who wanted fresh air. The night outside was cooler than the stuffy train car, and Georgia gulped it down gratefully. The water station was nothing more than a wooden tower and a small shack where the station master lived. A single lantern hung by the door, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Austin kept his hand on Georgia's elbow, guiding her away from the train, away from the light. Other passengers milled about, smoking cigarettes or relieving themselves in the darkness beyond the platform. No one paid attention to Austin and Georgia as they walked steadily toward the edge of the station grounds. "There," Austin murmured, pointing to a stand of cottonwood trees. "That is where the horses are." They walked faster now, Georgia's skirts catching on sagebrush and low shrubs. Behind them, the train hissed and clanked as the crew worked to fill the water tank. They reached the trees, and sure enough, 2 horses stood waiting, reins tied to a low branch. One was a tall bay gelding with a white blaze down his face. The other was a smaller paint mare, brown and white, with intelligent eyes that watched Georgia's approach. "You ever ridden before?" Austin asked as he untied the horses. "Yes, but not like this." Georgia looked at the paint mare. "Not at night, not running. The mare's name is Darcy. She is steady and she is smart. Stay behind me and let her follow my horse. She will know what to do even if you do not." Austin swung up onto the bay with practiced ease, then reached down. "Give me your bundle." Georgia handed up her wrapped possessions, and Austin secured them to his saddle. Then he dismounted again and came to help Georgia mount. His hands spanned her waist, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her into the saddle. Georgia's cheeks burned at the intimacy of it, at the strength in his hands, at how close his face had been to hers for just a moment. "You good?" Austin asked, looking up at her. "I think so," Georgia said, gripping the saddle horn. Austin mounted again, and without another word, he kicked the bay into motion. Darcy followed immediately, and Georgia had to concentrate to keep her seat as the horse moved from a walk to a trot to a smooth canter. Behind them, the train whistle blew, signaling that departure was imminent. Georgia did not look back. She kept her eyes on Austin's broad shoulders ahead of her, on the way he moved with his horse as if they were one creature, and she tried to remember everything her father had taught her about riding before he stopped having time for her. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only one. Austin kept them at a steady pace, not pushing the horses too hard but not wasting time either. The landscape around them was dark and featureless, just rolling prairie broken by occasional stands of trees or rocky outcroppings. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by, and the stars overhead were so thick and bright they looked like spilled salt across black velvet. Eventually, Austin slowed and then stopped beside a small creek lined with willow trees. "We will rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting. "Let the horses drink and catch their breath." Georgia climbed down less gracefully than Austin had, her legs shaking from the unaccustomed exercise. She stumbled, and Austin caught her arm, steadying her. "You did good," he said. "Most people who have not ridden much could not have kept that pace." "I feel like I will never walk normally again," Georgia admitted, and to her surprise, Austin smiled. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less hard. "That will pass," he promised. He led both horses to the creek, and they drank deeply, blowing and snorting. Austin checked their legs and hooves with efficient movements, making sure they were sound. Georgia found a relatively flat rock and sat down, grateful to be off the horse even for a short while. She looked at Austin, really looked at him for the first time. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, with a lean build that spoke of strength without bulk. He moved with a kind of economy, no wasted motion, everything purposeful. His clothes were worn but clean, practical gear for a man who spent his life working with horses and freight wagons. "How old are you?" Georgia asked suddenly. Austin glanced at her. "24. Why?" I just wondered. "You seem older somehow." "Hard living will do that." Austin finished checking the horses and came to sit on another rock near Georgia. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I have been on my own since I was 16. You grow up fast when there is no one to take care of you but yourself." "What happened to your family?" Georgia knew she was being forward, but the darkness and the strange intimacy of their situation made normal social conventions seem irrelevant. "Father died in the war. Mother took sick and died a year later. I had an older brother, but he went west looking for gold and I never heard from him again." Austin's voice was matter of fact, but Georgia heard the old pain underneath. "I've been working ranches and freight companies ever since, going where the work is." "I am sorry," Georgia said quietly. Austin shrugged. "It is what it is. Could be worse. At least I am free to make my own choices." "That is more than I have been," Georgia said bitterly. "My father has controlled every aspect of my life for as long as I can remember. What I wore, who I spoke to, where I went. And when I finally found the courage to stand up to him, he threw me away like garbage." "You are not garbage." Austin's voice was fierce. "You are brave. Braver than most men I know." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not feel brave, I feel terrified. Brave is not the same as unafraid. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway." Austin stood and offered her his hand again. "We should keep moving. Your father will know you are gone by morning and he will send men looking." Georgia let him pull her to her feet. "Where are we going? We cannot just go back to Fort Worth. You said it yourself, my father will kill us. We are going back, but we are not walking up to your front door." Austin moved to the horses and began checking the saddle girths. "I have a plan, but you are going to have to trust me. I am on a horse in the middle of the Texas prairie in the middle of the night with a man I just met," Georgia pointed out. "I think I already trust you more than is probably wise." That smile flickered across Austin's face again. "Fair point." He helped her mount Darcy, and then they were riding once more, the horses refreshed and ready to cover more ground. As they rode, Georgia found herself studying Austin's back, the set of his shoulders, the confident way he sat his horse. What kind of man threw away his livelihood to help a stranger? What kind of man risked his life because something was not right? She had known plenty of men in Fort Worth. Men who came to do business with her father, men who worked in the shops and saloons, men who attended church on Sunday and cheated their neighbors on Monday. None of them had ever impressed her. Most of them had seemed small and grasping, interested only in profit and position. Austin Thorne was different. Georgia could not quite put her finger on how, but she felt it in her bones. There was a core of integrity in him, something solid and unshakable. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. In Georgia's experience, that was rarer than gold. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east when Austin finally slowed their pace. They had been riding for hours, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Georgia was exhausted, every muscle in her body screaming, but she had not complained. She would not give Austin any reason to regret helping her. "There," Austin said, pointing ahead. "See that barn?" Georgia squinted and made out the dark shape of a building against the pre-dawn sky. "Yes. That belongs to a friend of mine, Charlie Morrison. He runs a small horse ranch about 10 miles outside Fort Worth. We can rest there, get some food, and figure out our next move." They rode up to the barn just as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The barn was well maintained, and next to it stood a modest house with smoke already rising from the chimney. Before they even dismounted, the front door opened and a man stepped out. He was older than Austin, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. He wore suspenders over a work shirt and carried a rifle, but when he saw Austin, he lowered it and grinned. "Austin Thorne, you old dog, what brings you out here at this ungodly hour?" Then Charlie's eyes found Georgia and his expression shifted to curiosity. "And with company, I see." Austin dismounted and helped Georgia down. "Charlie, this is Miss Georgia Novak. Georgia, this is Charlie Morrison, the best horse breeder in North Texas and one of the few truly honest men I know." Charlie propped his rifle against the porch railing and came forward, extending his hand to Georgia. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Any friend of Austin's is welcome here." He looked between them, clearly waiting for an explanation. "Georgia's father is Richard Novak," Austin said quietly. "He owns Novak Freight." Charlie's friendly expression hardened slightly. "I know the name. Can't say I care much for the man. He tried to cheat me on a shipment of horses last year. He sent Georgia away on the midnight train to Kansas City because she discovered he was running crooked business," Austin continued. "I got her off the train and brought her back. We need a place to lay low for a day or two while I work some things out." Charlie whistled low. "You do not do anything by halves, do you, boy?" But he was already nodding. "Come on inside. My wife will have breakfast ready and you both look like you could use some food and rest. We can talk after you have eaten." The inside of the Morrison house was warm and cozy, smelling of coffee and frying bacon. A plump woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair looked up from the stove as they entered. "Charlie, who is?" She trailed off, taking in Georgia's rumpled dress and exhausted face, Austin's dusty clothes and grim expression. "Martha, this is Austin Thorne and Miss Georgia Novak. They need our help." Charlie said this simply, and Martha did not ask questions. She just nodded and pulled out 2 more plates. "Sit down, both of you. You look half dead." Martha poured coffee into thick mugs and set them on the table. "Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes." Georgia sank into a chair and wrapped her hands around the warm mug. She had not realized how cold she was until she came into the warmth of the house. Now she could not stop shivering. Martha noticed. "Charlie, get a blanket for the poor girl." She came over and put a gentle hand on Georgia's shoulder. "You are safe here, dear. Whatever trouble you are in, we will help if we can." The kindness in her voice was too much. Georgia felt tears spill down her cheeks, and then she was crying in earnest, all the fear and exhaustion and confusion of the past week pouring out of her. Martha pulled up a chair and put her arms around Georgia, making soothing sounds while Georgia sobbed against her shoulder. When the storm of tears finally passed, Georgia pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I do not usually fall apart like that." "You have nothing to apologize for," Martha said firmly. "Now drink that coffee and eat something. Everything looks better on a full stomach." Austin had been standing awkwardly near the door, but now Charlie pulled him aside and they spoke in low voices. Georgia could not hear what they were saying, but she saw Charlie nod several times and clap Austin on the shoulder. Breakfast was simple but delicious. Bacon, eggs, biscuits with butter and honey, and more coffee. Georgia ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry she was until food was in front of her. Across the table, Austin ate with the same focused intensity he seemed to bring to everything. When the meal was finished, Charlie pushed back from the table. "All right, let us talk this through. Richard Novak is a powerful man in Fort Worth. He has friends on the city council, friends in the sheriff's office. If he wants you found, Miss Novak, he will have men looking. What is your plan, Austin?" "I am going to make sure everyone knows what Novak has been doing," Austin said. "I am going to take evidence of his crooked dealings to the newspaper and to the territorial marshal. Once it is public, he would not dare hurt Georgia because everyone would know he had a reason to silence her." "That is a dangerous game," Charlie warned. Novak could just as easily have you killed before you make it to the newspaper, which is why I need your help." Austin leaned forward. "I need you to take Georgia to your sister's place in Dallas. Keep her safe while I deal with Novak." "No." Georgia's voice was sharp. Both men turned to look at her. "No," she repeated. "I am not running away again. If you are going to expose my father, I should be there. I am the one who discovered what he was doing. I should be the one to tell the truth." "It is too dangerous," Austin said flatly. "It is my life." Georgia met his eyes steadily. "And my choice. You came and got me off that train because you said it was not right for me to be punished for telling the truth. Well, I am not going to hide while you take all the risk. We do this together or we do not do it at all." Austin's jaw tightened, and for a moment Georgia thought he was going to argue, but then something shifted in his expression and he nodded slowly. "Together, then." Martha and Charlie exchanged glances. "You are both crazy," Martha said, but she was smiling slightly. "But I suppose someone needs to stand up to Richard Novak. The man has been running roughshod over this county for too long." They spent the rest of the morning planning. Charlie had contacts in Fort Worth who might be willing to help, people Novak had wronged over the years. Austin knew where Novak kept his business records, in a safe in his office above the freight warehouse. If they could get those records, they would have proof of everything. The watered-down whiskey, the false weights on grain shipments, the bribes paid to city officials. "The office will be locked up tight," Austin said, sketching a rough map of the warehouse on a piece of paper. "But I have a key. Novak never bothered to collect it when I quit. I figure I have until sometime today before he thinks to change the locks." "You will need someone to stand watch," Charlie said. "I can do that." "And I will come with you into the office," Georgia added. "I know where my father keeps the most damaging records. He thought I was not paying attention, but I was." They decided to wait until nightfall to make their move. In the meantime, Martha showed Georgia to a small guest room where she could rest and clean up. There was a basin of water, clean towels, and a simple but comfortable bed. Georgia washed the trail dust from her face and hands, then lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes. She woke to late afternoon sun slanting through the window and the smell of cooking food. For a moment she was disoriented, not sure where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The train, Austin, the midnight ride across the prairie. She sat up, noticing that someone had removed her shoes and covered her with a quilt. Her bundle of possessions sat on a chair in the corner. Georgia stood and stretched, working out the stiffness in her muscles. She found a brush in her bundle and did her best to make herself presentable, braiding her long dark hair and pinning it up. She changed into the more practical dress she had brought, a dark blue cotton that would not show dirt easily. When she emerged from the room, she found Austin and Charlie sitting at the kitchen table, still talking through their plan. Austin looked up when she entered and something flickered in his eyes, an expression she could not quite read. "You look rested," he said. "I needed it." Georgia came to the table. "What time do we leave?" "After dark. Charlie will drive us into town in his wagon, something less conspicuous than riding in on horseback." Austin stood and moved to the window, looking out at the setting sun. "Georgia, are you sure about this?" "Once we start, there is no going back." "I have never been more sure of anything," Georgia said, and it was true. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was doing something that mattered, something that was entirely her own choice. The wait until darkness was agonizing. Martha served dinner, but Georgia could barely eat. Her stomach was a knot of nerves and anticipation. Austin seemed calm, but she noticed he kept checking his gun, a well-worn Colt revolver he wore in a holster on his hip. She had not thought about the fact that he was armed until now, and it brought home just how dangerous this could be. Finally, the sun set and full darkness fell. Charlie hitched his wagon and they all climbed aboard, Georgia sitting between Austin and Charlie on the bench seat. Martha stood in the doorway, a worried expression on her face. "You all be careful," she called, "and come back safe." The ride into Fort Worth took about an hour. Charlie kept the horses at a steady trot, not rushing but not dawdling either. As they got closer to town, they began to see other traffic. Riders heading home from a day's work, a stagecoach rumbling past, a group of cowboys driving cattle toward the stockyards. Fort Worth at night was a different place than during the day. Saloons blazed with light and noise, piano music spilling out into the streets. Men and women of questionable repute stood in doorways, calling out to passers-by. Dogs barked, and somewhere a drunk was singing off-key. Charlie drove the wagon past the main street and into the warehouse district. Here it was quieter, darker. Most of the businesses were closed for the night, and the streets were empty except for the occasional watchman making his rounds. Novak Freight occupied a large building near the train depot. The warehouse itself was a cavernous structure of wood and corrugated tin. The office was a two-story addition at the front, with large windows that overlooked the loading docks. All the windows were dark now. Charlie pulled the wagon into an alley across the street where they could watch the building without being seen. "I will stay here and keep an eye out," he said quietly. "If I see anyone coming, I will whistle twice. You hear that, you get out fast." Austin nodded. He turned to Georgia. "Last chance to change your mind." "Not a chance," Georgia said. She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Inside, her heart was hammering, but she refused to let fear stop her now. They climbed down from the wagon and crossed the street, keeping to the shadows. Austin led her around to a side door, away from the street. He produced a key from his pocket and slid it into the lock. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the warehouse was pitch black and smelled of sawdust and machine oil. Austin produced a small lantern and lit it, keeping the flame low. The light revealed rows of crates and barrels, freight wagons with their tongues propped up, coils of rope and spare harnesses hanging from pegs. They made their way through the warehouse to a staircase at the back that led up to the office. Every creak of the floorboards sounded impossibly loud to Georgia's ears. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see her father emerge from the darkness. The office door was locked, but Austin made short work of it with a different key. They slipped inside, and Austin closed the door behind them before turning up the lantern slightly. Her father's office was neat and orderly, everything in its place. A large desk dominated the room, with filing cabinets along one wall and a safe in the corner. Ledger books were stacked on shelves, years of business records. "Where do we start?" Austin asked. Georgia moved to the filing cabinets. "These will have the shipping manifests and weight records. That is where you will find evidence of him shorting customers." She pulled open a drawer and started flipping through files. "And the ledgers on that shelf will show the payments to city officials." They worked quickly and quietly, pulling out documents and stacking them on the desk. Georgia found shipping records that showed freight weights that did not match what had actually been delivered. Austin found ledgers with cryptic entries that, once decoded, clearly showed regular payments to a city councilman and a deputy sheriff. "The safe," Georgia said suddenly. "He keeps the really incriminating stuff in there. Letters from business partners, records of deals he does not want anyone to know about." Austin moved to the safe. It was a heavy iron box with a combination lock. "I do not suppose you know the combination." Georgia thought for a moment, then moved to the safe and began turning the dial. "My mother's birthday," she murmured. "He used it for everything." She tried several combinations before the lock finally clicked open. Inside the safe were stacks of cash, some jewelry, and a thick folder of papers. Georgia pulled out the folder and began leafing through it. Her eyes widened. "Austin, look at this. These are contracts with saloon owners, showing that he has been selling them watered-down whiskey for years. And this." She pulled out another sheet. "This is a letter from a territorial official, talking about a bribe my father paid to secure a freight contract." "That is enough to put him away for a long time," Austin said grimly. He began gathering up the most damaging documents. "Let us get these and go." They were stuffing papers into a satchel Austin had brought when they heard it. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. Austin's head snapped up. Someone is coming. Georgia's blood ran cold. Had Charlie tried to warn them? Had they missed the signal? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and the office door burst open. Richard Novak stood in the doorway, flanked by two large men Georgia recognized as warehouse workers. Her father's face was purple with rage. "You," he snarled, looking at Austin. "I should have known you were behind this." "Hello, Father," Georgia said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "We were just collecting evidence of your crimes." "Crimes?" Novak laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "I built this business from nothing. Everything I did to make it succeed. I do not answer to anyone, least of all my ungrateful daughter." "You cheated people," Georgia shot back. "You lied and stole and bribed officials. That is not building a business, that is being a criminal." Novak's face got even redder. "You stupid girl, you have no idea what you have done." "Did you really think I would not find out you got off that train? I had a man watching, just in case you tried something foolish. He sent word and I have been waiting for you to show up here." He looked at Austin. "And you? I should have fired you months ago. You were always too nosy, asking too many questions." "I ask questions when I see something wrong," Austin said. His hand had moved to his gun, but he had not drawn it yet. The two warehouse workers both had guns out, pointed at Austin and Georgia. "Drop your weapon," one of them ordered. "Nice and slow." Austin hesitated, and Georgia could see him calculating odds, angles, trying to figure a way out. But there was no way out. Two guns against one, and Georgia to protect. Slowly, Austin pulled his gun from its holster and set it on the desk. "Smart man," Novak said. "Now, here is what is going to happen. You two are going to disappear. An unfortunate accident, maybe a fire in the warehouse. So tragic. By the time anyone finds the bodies, there would not be enough left to identify." Georgia felt terror spike through her. He really meant it. Her own father was going to kill her. "You would murder your own daughter," she whispered. "You stopped being my daughter when you betrayed me," Novak said coldly. "You are nothing but a problem that needs to be solved." Austin shifted slightly, putting himself between Georgia and the gunmen. "You will not hurt her. And how exactly are you going to stop me?" Novak laughed again. Then he nodded to his men. "Do it." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. One of the gunmen raised his weapon, pointing it at Austin's chest. Georgia screamed. Austin grabbed the lantern from the desk and hurled it at the gunman. The lantern shattered against the man's chest, spraying oil and flame. The gunman shrieked and stumbled backward, frantically trying to beat out the flames. The second gunman fired, but his shot went wild as Austin dove behind the desk, grabbing Georgia and pulling her down with him. The bullets smashed into the wall above their heads. Novak was shouting, the wounded gunman was still screaming, and smoke was beginning to fill the room from the burning oil. Austin snatched his gun from the desk and fired twice. The second gunman went down, clutching his leg. "Go," Austin shouted at Georgia. "Out the back window." Georgia looked at the window behind her father's desk. It was small, but she might fit through it. Austin fired again, keeping Novak and his men pinned down, and Georgia scrambled to the window. She struggled with the latch, her hands shaking, until finally it came free and the window swung open. She looked back at Austin. "Come on." Austin fired his last shot and then ran to the window. He boosted Georgia through first, and she found herself hanging out over an alley 1 story up. It was too far to jump safely, but there was no choice. She let go and hit the ground hard, rolling. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself to her feet. A second later, Austin came through the window, dropping and landing in a crouch. Behind them, smoke was pouring from the office window, and they could hear Novak shouting for help. "Can you walk?" Austin asked, his hand on Georgia's arm. "I think so." Georgia took a step and winced. Her ankle hurt, but it held her weight. They ran down the alley, Austin half supporting Georgia, and came out on the street where Charlie was waiting with the wagon. His eyes widened when he saw the smoke beginning to billow from the warehouse. "What happened?" "Novak was waiting for us," Austin said, practically throwing Georgia into the wagon and vaulting up after her. "Drive." Charlie did not need to be told twice. He snapped the reins and the horses lunged into motion. Behind them, they could hear shouts and the ringing of a fire bell. People were pouring out of nearby buildings, forming bucket brigades to fight the fire. "Did you get what you needed?" Charlie asked as they raced through the streets. "Some of it," Austin said. He had managed to hold onto the satchel with the documents. "Not everything, but enough." They made it out of town without being stopped, but they all knew it was only a matter of time before Novak sent men after them. Charlie pushed the horses hard, getting as much distance as possible before they tired. By the time they reached the Morrison Ranch, it was nearly midnight. Martha was waiting up, and she gasped when she saw Georgia limping and Austin with powder burns on his shirt and face. "What happened?" "The short version is that Richard Novak tried to kill us. We set his warehouse on fire, and now we really need to get these documents to someone who can use them before he comes after us again," Austin said tersely. They gathered in the kitchen, and Austin spread the documents they had managed to salvage on the table. There were shipping manifests, ledger pages, and a few of the letters from the safe. Not as much as they had hoped for, but Charlie examined them carefully and nodded. "This is enough," he said. "This shows a clear pattern of fraud and bribery. If we can get this to the territorial marshal, he will have to investigate." "The marshal's office is in Dallas," Martha said. "That is a day's ride." "Then we leave at first light," Austin said. He looked at Georgia. "How is your ankle?" "It hurts, but I will manage." Georgia was wrapping a strip of cloth around the swollen joint, binding it tightly. "You should stay here and rest," Austin began, but Georgia cut him off. "We have been through this. I am coming with you." Austin looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. "All right, but we will need to move fast. Novak will not give up easily." They tried to get a few hours of sleep, but Georgia found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, twisted with rage, heard him say that she was nothing but a problem to be solved. Her own father had tried to have her killed. The reality of it was almost too much to process. She must have dozed eventually because the next thing she knew, Martha was shaking her gently. "Time to wake up, dear. Austin wants to leave within the hour." Georgia dressed quickly, favoring her injured ankle. When she emerged, she found Austin and Charlie loading supplies into saddlebags. The bay and the paint mare were already saddled and waiting. Martha pressed a package of food into Georgia's hands. "For the road, and you take care of yourself here. That young man cares about you even if he has not said it yet." Georgia felt her cheeks warm. "I do not think." "I have been married to Charlie for 30 years, Martha interrupted. "I know what I see." Austin Thorne looks at you like you are the sun and the moon and all the stars combined. You just make sure you both come back safe so you have a chance to figure that out." Before Georgia could respond, Austin called that they were ready to go. Charlie was saddling his own horse, planning to ride with them to Dallas. "I have some business there anyway," he said, "and you could use another gun if Novak's men catch up to you." They set out as the sun was rising, riding southeast toward Dallas. The day was clear and warm, promising to be hot by afternoon. Georgia's ankle throbbed with every step the mare took, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing. They had bigger problems than a twisted ankle. They rode hard, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat some of Martha's food. Austin kept scanning the horizon behind them, watching for pursuit. By midday, they spotted it. A group of riders, maybe 4 or 5, pushing hard to close the distance. "That would be Novak's men," Charlie said grimly. "How far to Dallas?" Austin asked. "Another 6 hours at this pace. They will catch us long before that." Austin thought for a moment, then pointed to a line of trees ahead. "That is the Trinity River. If we can cross before they reach us, we might be able to lose them in the bottomlands on the other side." They urged the horses into a gallop, racing for the river. Georgia clung to the saddle horn, her injured ankle screaming in protest, but she did not slow them down. Behind them, the pursuing riders saw their quarry running and kicked their own horses into a gallop. They reached the river just as the pursuers came within rifle range. A shot cracked out, and dirt kicked up near Charlie's horse. They plunged into the water, the horses struggling against the current. The Trinity was not deep this time of year, but the bottom was muddy and treacherous. They made it to the other side and crashed into the thick vegetation of the bottomlands, willow and cottonwood and dense underbrush. Austin led them into the thickest part, where the horses had to push through hanging vines and low branches. Behind them, they heard shouts and more gunfire, but the shots were wild, the shooters unable to see their targets through the vegetation. Austin kept them moving, threading through the densest cover until finally the sounds of pursuit faded. They rode for another hour through the bottomlands before Austin finally slowed. "I think we lost them. For now," Charlie said, "but they will keep looking. Then we keep moving." Austin looked at Georgia. "How are you holding up?" "I am fine," Georgia lied. In truth, she was exhausted, her ankle was on fire, and she felt like she might fall out of the saddle at any moment, but they could not stop, not yet. They emerged from the bottomlands as the sun was setting, and Dallas lay before them, a sprawling town significantly larger than Fort Worth. Gas lamps were being lit along the main streets, and they could see the imposing structure of the courthouse in the center of town. "The marshal's office is near the courthouse," Charlie said, "but we should wait until morning. Showing up in the middle of the night will just make us look suspicious." They found a modest hotel on the edge of town and paid for 2 rooms, one for Charlie and one for Austin and Georgia. The clerk gave them a curious look, but he took their money and handed over the keys without comment. Georgia practically collapsed once she was inside the room. Austin caught her and helped her to the bed. "Let me look at that ankle." He knelt and carefully removed her boot. Her ankle was swollen to twice its normal size and had turned an ugly purple color. Austin touched it gently, feeling the bones. "I do not think it is broken, but you really did a number on it. It will be fine once I can rest," Georgia said. "You should have said something. We could have stopped more often. And let those men catch us. I do not think so." Georgia lay back on the bed, too tired to even take off her dress. "Austin, what happens tomorrow? Even if the marshal believes us, my father has money and influence. He could drag this out for years." Austin sat on the edge of the bed. The room was small, with barely enough space for the bed and a washstand. A single lantern cast warm light and deep shadows. "Your father tried to kill you tonight," Austin said quietly. "He tried to kill both of us." Even if the marshal does not move against him right away, Novak will know that we have evidence. He will know that if anything happens to us, that evidence will come to light. That gives us leverage. "I do not have anywhere to go," Georgia said, and to her horror, her eyes filled with tears. "I cannot go home. I have no family except my father, and he wants me dead. What am I supposed to do?" Austin was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers closing around hers. "You are not alone. I will not abandon you, Georgia, I promise." Georgia looked at him through her tears. In the lamplight, his face was all hard planes and shadows, but his eyes were soft, gentle in a way she had never seen from him before. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why are you risking so much for me?" Austin seemed to struggle with how to answer. "When I first started working for your father, you came to the warehouse sometimes to bring him lunch or deliver messages. You were always kind to the workers, always remembered names, asked about families. Most rich men's daughters would not even look at men like us." "That is just basic decency," Georgia protested. "You would be surprised how rare that is." Austin's thumb rubbed across her knuckles, a gentle, absent-minded gesture. "Then a few months ago there was an accident. One of the young workers got his hand crushed loading a wagon. Your father did not want to pay for a doctor, said the boy should have been more careful. But you heard about it and you paid for the doctor yourself. You probably do not even remember." "I remember," Georgia said softly. "His name was Tommy. He was 14. 15, actually. His birthday had just passed." Austin smiled slightly. "He told everyone what you did. The other workers, they all talked about it, about how you were different, how you cared. So when I heard your father talking about sending you away, about getting rid of his troublesome daughter, I could not." He paused, searching for words. "I could not let that happen. Not to you." Georgia felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the stuffy hotel room. She sat up, ignoring the protest from her ankle, and found herself very close to Austin. Close enough to see the scar on his cheekbone, close enough to count the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "Austin," she said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. It was not just kindness or friendship. It was something deeper, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Georgia did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and feel of each other. Then Austin's hand came up to cup her face, his fingers sliding into her hair, and the kiss deepened. Georgia wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and felt him shudder against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you on that train," he admitted. "You should have done it sooner," Georgia said, and then she was kissing him again. All the fear and uncertainty of the past 2 days pouring out in a desperate need to be close to him, to feel safe, to know that she was not alone. They kissed until they were both dizzy, until the world narrowed down to just the two of them and nothing else mattered. Finally, Austin pulled back, though it clearly took effort. "You need to rest," he said, his voice rough. "And I need to sleep on the floor because I do not trust myself to lie next to you and be a gentleman about it." Georgia laughed, surprised that she still could. "You are a good man, Austin Thorne. I am trying to be." He stood and grabbed a blanket from the bed, making himself a pallet on the floor. "Get some sleep, Georgia. Tomorrow we end this." Georgia lay down, and despite everything, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the knowledge that Austin was nearby, that she was safe, that she was not alone. Morning came too soon. Georgia woke to find Austin already up and dressed, looking out the window at the street below. He turned when he heard her stir. "How is the ankle?" Georgia tested it carefully. "Still sore, but better than last night. I will manage." They met Charlie downstairs and had a quick breakfast of eggs and biscuits before heading to the marshal's office. The building was a solid brick structure with bars on the windows. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk, and behind him they could see a hallway leading to cells. "We need to see the marshal," Austin said. "It is urgent." The deputy looked them over skeptically. "Marshal is busy. What is this about?" "It is about a corrupt freight operator in Fort Worth who has been defrauding customers and bribing officials for years," Charlie said. "And who tried to kill these two young people when they discovered what he was doing." The deputy's expression changed. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door at the back, and they heard muffled voices. A few minutes later, a tall man with a thick mustache and a badge pinned to his vest emerged. He looked to be in his 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I am Marshal Webb. Deputy says you have information about corruption in Fort Worth." Austin stepped forward and handed over the satchel of documents. "Yes, sir. Richard Novak owns Novak Freight. These documents show that he has been shorting customers on shipments, selling diluted goods, and paying bribes to city officials. When his daughter discovered what he was doing and confronted him, he had her put on a train to Kansas City to get her out of the way. I helped her escape, and when we went back to get more evidence, Novak and his men tried to kill us." Webb took the satchel and began examining the contents. His expression grew grimmer as he read. Finally, he looked up at Georgia. "You are Novak's daughter?" "Yes, sir." Georgia lifted her chin. "And I am willing to testify to everything I know about his illegal activities." Webb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "This is substantial. I will need to investigate further, but based on what I am seeing here, there is enough to bring charges." He looked at Austin. "You worked for Novak." "I did, until a few days ago when I quit." "And you are willing to testify as well?" "Yes, sir." Webb closed the satchel. "All right. I will send deputies to Fort Worth to bring Novak in for questioning. In the meantime, I am going to need you all to stay in Dallas. I may have more questions, and I will definitely need your testimony when this goes to trial." "How long will that take?" Georgia asked. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how quickly we can build a case and get it before a judge." Webb looked at her sympathetically. "I know this is not what you want to hear, but that is how the law works. You did the right thing coming forward, Miss Novak. Not many people have the courage to stand up to family, especially when that family has power and money." They left the marshal's office with mixed feelings. On one hand, they had accomplished what they set out to do: expose Richard Novak and make sure he faced justice. On the other hand, they were now stuck in Dallas indefinitely, with no clear plan for what came next. "You two can stay with my sister," Charlie offered. "She runs a boarding house on the north side of town. Good people, fair prices. I will vouch for you." They took him up on the offer. Charlie's sister, Helen, was a widow in her 60s who ran a tidy establishment with 6 rooms for boarders. She took one look at George's tired face and swollen ankle and immediately set about making her comfortable, bringing ice for the ankle and a pot of tea. "You poor dear," Helen clucked. "Charlie told me a bit about your situation. You just rest up here and do not worry about anything." Over the next few days, Georgia and Austin settled into a strange new routine. They could not go back to Fort Worth, not yet, so they stayed at Helen's boarding house. Austin found work at a nearby livery stable, mucking stalls and caring for horses. It was not glamorous, but it paid enough to cover their room and board. Georgia helped Helen around the boarding house, cleaning and cooking despite her sore ankle. It felt good to be useful, to have something to do with her hands. But mostly, she spent time with Austin. They would sit on the front porch in the evenings after the day's work was done, talking about everything and nothing. Austin told her stories about growing up on his own, about the places he had been and the people he had met. Georgia told him about her mother, about her childhood before her father became consumed by his business. They did not talk much about the future. It felt too uncertain, too fragile. But the present was enough. The present was evenings on the porch, Austin's hand finding hers in the darkness. The present was stolen kisses when no one was looking, the heat of his mouth on hers, the way her heart raced when he smiled at her. 2 weeks after they arrived in Dallas, Marshal Webb sent word that Richard Novak had been arrested. The marshal's deputies had gone to Fort Worth and found evidence at the warehouse that corroborated what Georgia and Austin had provided. Novak was now in the Dallas jail, awaiting trial. "Would you like to see him?" Webb asked Georgia when she and Austin went to the marshal's office for an update. "He has been asking for you." Georgia felt a chill run through her. "Why would he want to see me?" "I could not say, but you have the right to visit him if you want, or not. It is entirely up to you." Georgia looked at Austin. He took her hand. "I will support whatever you decide," he said quietly. Georgia thought about it. Part of her never wanted to see her father again, never wanted to hear his voice or look into his eyes. But another part of her needed closure, needed to face him one more time as her own person, not as his property to be disposed of. "I will see him," she said. "But I want Austin with me." Webb nodded and led them back to the cells. Richard Novak sat on a narrow cot in the third cell down. He looked older than Georgia remembered, his face haggard and gray. When he saw her, he stood and came to the bars. "Georgia, thank God, I knew you would come." His voice was eager, almost desperate. "You have to tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them I was just trying to protect you." Georgia stared at her father and felt nothing but a strange, distant sadness. This man had given her life, had raised her after her mother died, and he had been willing to kill her to protect his secrets. "I am not here to help you," she said calmly. "I am here to tell you that I am not your daughter anymore. You made that clear when you tried to have me killed. You made your choice, and now you will live with the consequences." Novak's face twisted. "You ungrateful little—" "I am grateful," Georgia interrupted. "I am grateful that Austin Thorne has more honor in his little finger than you have in your entire body. I am grateful that I got away from you before you destroyed whatever was good left in me. And I am grateful that you will spend the rest of your life in prison, unable to hurt anyone else." She turned to go, and Novak lunged at the bars. "Georgia, do not turn your back on me. I am your father." "No," Georgia said without looking back. "You are nothing to me." Austin put his arm around her shoulders as they walked out of the jail, and Georgia leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am better than all right," Georgia said, and she meant it. She felt lighter somehow, as if cutting ties with her father had lifted a weight she had not realized she was carrying. "I am free." The trial happened 3 months later. It was a sensation in Dallas and Fort Worth, the wealthy freight operator brought down by his own daughter and a cowboy who would not look the other way. Newspapers covered every detail. Georgia and Austin both testified, as did several of Novak's former customers and employees who came forward once they knew it was safe to do so. The verdict was never in doubt. Richard Novak was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. After the trial, Austin and Georgia stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by well-wishers and reporters. Georgia looked up at Austin and saw her own relief reflected in his eyes. "It is over," she said. "It is over," he agreed. Then he took her hand and led her away from the crowd, walking until they found a quiet spot in a small park near the courthouse. "Georgia, I need to ask you something," Austin said. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "These past few months, getting to know you, spending time with you. You have become the most important person in my world. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Georgia's heart began to beat faster. "Austin." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Georgia saw a simple gold ring with a tiny diamond. "It is not much," Austin said. "I have been saving every penny I made at the livery stable, but I am not a rich man, Georgia. I cannot give you the life you had before, but I can promise you honesty and loyalty and love. So much love." He dropped to one knee. "Georgia Novak, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Georgia's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Austin slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was standing and sweeping her into his arms, kissing her while she laughed and cried at the same time. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at Charlie and Martha Morrison's ranch. Helen came down from Dallas, along with several of the other boarders. Some of Austin's friends from the livery stable attended, as did several of the workers from Novak Freight who had always liked Georgia. Charlie gave Georgia away, and Martha cried happy tears through the entire ceremony. The local preacher performed the service under a canopy of cottonwood trees, with the Texas sky stretched blue and endless overhead. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Austin kissed Georgia like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Georgia felt a joy so complete it almost frightened her. A month ago, she had been on a train to Kansas City, being sent away like unwanted baggage. Now she was Mrs. Austin Thorne, married to a man she loved more than she had ever thought possible. They had no money for a honeymoon, so they spent their wedding night in the same guest room at the Morrison Ranch where Georgia had slept that first night. But it did not matter. Nothing mattered except that they were together. Austin was gentle with her, patient, taking his time to learn what she liked, what made her gasp and cling to him. They explored each other in the lamplight, mapping skin and muscle and secret places. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Georgia's eyes. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Georgia's head on Austin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Austin said, his arms tightening around her. "I loved you from the moment I saw you on that train, looking so scared and so brave at the same time. I will love you until the day I die." They stayed at the ranch for a few more days, helping Charlie with the horses and enjoying being newlyweds. But eventually they had to decide what came next. "We could go back to Fort Worth," Georgia suggested one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "With my father in prison, there is nothing stopping us." Austin was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to go back, after everything that happened there?" Georgia thought about it. Fort Worth had been her home, but it was also the place where her father had betrayed her, where she had been sent away, where she had almost been killed. Did she really want to live with those memories? "No," she said slowly. "I do not think I do. Fort Worth feels like the past. I want to look toward the future." "Then where do you want to go?" Austin asked. "I do not know." Georgia leaned against him. "Where do you want to go?" "I have been thinking about that. Charlie mentioned there is good land available in the hill country west of here. Small ranches going cheap because the previous owners could not make a go of it. We could start fresh, build something of our own." Georgia sat up, excitement kindling. "A ranch? You want to be a rancher. I have worked with horses my whole life. I know how to breed them, train them, care for them. And you grew up around business. You know how to keep books, how to deal with customers. Austin's eyes were bright with possibility. We could do it together, Georgia, build a life from nothing, just the two of us. Yes, Georgia said immediately. Yes, let us do it. Let us build something that is ours. They left the Morrison Ranch a week later with Charlie's blessing and a promise to visit often. They rode west into the hill country where the land rolled and buckled, covered in oak trees and cedar, cut through with clear running streams. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed. They found their land on a crisp autumn day. It was 160 acres along a creek, with a small cabin that needed work and a barn that needed even more work. But the water was good, the grass was good, and there was room to grow. This is it, Austin said, and Georgia nodded. She could see it all in her mind. Horses grazing in the pasture, a garden near the house, maybe children playing in the yard someday. They bought the land with money from selling Georgia's mother's jewelry and a small loan from Charlie. Then they set to work. Austin repaired the barn and built corrals while Georgia worked on making the cabin livable. It was hard work, harder than anything Georgia had ever done, but it was satisfying in a way her old life had never been. They bought their first horses in the spring, 3 mares and a good stallion. Austin had an eye for quality, and the horses he chose were sound and strong. By summer, all 3 mares were in foal. Life on the ranch was simple but good. They woke with the sun and worked until dark. They ate simple meals that Georgia learned to cook over the wood stove. They fell into bed exhausted every night, but they always found time to hold each other, to whisper words of love, to remind themselves how lucky they were. News from Fort Worth reached them occasionally. Richard Novak had tried to appeal his conviction but had lost. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Georgia felt no satisfaction in that, only a distant sadness for what might have been if he had been a different kind of man. Their first year on the ranch was hard. Money was tight, and there were times when Georgia wondered if they had made a mistake, if they should have stayed in Dallas where Austin had steady work. But Austin never wavered in his belief that they could make it work, and his confidence gave her strength. The 3 mares foaled in the spring, and all 3 colts were healthy and strong. Austin began training them as yearlings, and word spread about the quality of the Thorne horses. By their second year, they had customers coming from all over the hill country to look at their stock. It was during their second summer on the ranch that Georgia realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses and had been feeling sick in the mornings. At first she was afraid, but when she told Austin, his face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "We are going to have a baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby," Georgia confirmed, and then Austin was lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, whooping with delight. He was impossibly protective during her pregnancy, not wanting her to do anything strenuous. Georgia laughed at him and kept working, though she did let him take over the heavier chores. As her belly swelled, she found herself filled with a contentment she had never known. This was what she had always wanted without knowing it, a simple life with a good man, building something together. Their son was born on a cold December night. Martha Morrison had come to stay for the birth, and she helped Georgia through the long hours of labor. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, Austin was there to cut the cord and hold his son for the first time. They named him James, after Austin's father. He was a healthy baby with Austin's gray eyes and Georgia's dark hair. Austin was besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. "I cannot believe we made him," he whispered one night as they lay in bed with James sleeping in a cradle nearby. "He is perfect." "He is perfect," Georgia agreed, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. Life continued. James grew from a baby to a toddler, running around the ranch and learning about horses from his father. The ranch prospered. They were never rich, but they were comfortable, able to hire a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. When James was 3, Georgia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They named them Daniel and Emma. Austin built an addition onto the cabin to make room for their growing family. The house was filled with noise and laughter, with the sounds of children playing and horses neighing in the corrals. Georgia sometimes thought about her old life in Fort Worth, about the girl she had been. It seemed like a different person, someone she barely recognized. That Georgia had been afraid and trapped, living according to someone else's rules. This Georgia, Mrs. Austin Thorne, was free in every way that mattered. She taught her children to read and write, using books she ordered from Dallas. Austin taught them about horses and about the land. They grew up understanding the value of hard work and honest dealing, the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was hard. When Emma was 5, a letter arrived from Dallas. Charlie Morrison had died peacefully in his sleep. They rode to the funeral with all 3 children, Georgia holding baby Emma while James and Daniel rode in front of Austin. Martha was devastated but grateful for the friends who came to say goodbye. After the funeral, Martha pulled Georgia aside. "I want you to have something," she said, leading Georgia into her house. She pulled out a wooden box and opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, tied with a ribbon. "These are letters Charlie wrote over the years talking about you and Austin," Martha said. "About how proud he was of what you had built, how you two gave him hope that there were still good people in the world. I thought you should have them." Georgia took the letters with tears in her eyes. "Charlie and you saved us. I do not know what would have happened if he had not helped us that night." "You would have figured something out," Martha said firmly. "You are the strongest, bravest woman I know, Georgia Thorne, and that husband of yours would walk through fire for you. You two were meant to be together." They stayed with Martha for a week, helping her sort through Charlie's things and making sure she would be all right. When they left, they promised to visit more often, to not let so much time pass between trips. The years rolled by. James grew tall and strong, taking after his father. He loved the horses and was a natural trainer. Daniel was quieter, more interested in books and learning. Emma was a firecracker, fearless and stubborn, reminding Georgia of herself. When Georgia was 35, she gave birth to one more child, another boy they named Charlie in honor of their friend. Austin was 40 by then, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes, but he was still as strong as ever, still as devoted to Georgia as he had been the night he got on that train to save her. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their children play in the yard, and Austin would take Georgia's hand. "You ever regret it?" he would ask sometimes, "giving up the life you could have had?" And Georgia would always answer the same way. "I gave up nothing. I gained everything." Richard Novak died in prison when Georgia was 38. She got a letter from the warden informing her of his death and asking if she wanted to claim the body. Georgia wrote back and said no. Her father had made his choices and she had made hers. There was nothing more to be said. As their children grew older, the ranch grew with them. James eventually took over most of the horse training, and he had a gift for it that even exceeded his father's. Daniel went to Dallas to study law, inspired by the marshals and lawyers who had brought his grandfather to justice. Emma proved to have her mother's head for business, keeping the books and managing sales with impressive skill. By the time Georgia was 50, she was a grandmother. James married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Georgia and Austin 3 grandchildren. Daniel married a woman he met in Dallas, a schoolteacher, and they had 2 children. Emma, to everyone's surprise, married a ranch hand who worked for them, a good man who loved her fierce spirit. Georgia and Austin would sit on their porch, now rebuilt and expanded, and watch their grandchildren play. Austin's hair was completely gray now, and there were deep lines in his face, but his eyes were still that same unusual gray. And when he looked at Georgia, she still felt like she was 20 years old on a midnight train, meeting the man who would change her life forever. "Do you remember that night?" she asked him once. "The night you got on the train." "I remember everything," Austin said. "I remember being scared to death that I was making a huge mistake. I remember thinking I must be crazy, throwing away everything to help someone I barely knew. But mostly I remember seeing your face when you said you would come with me. You looked at me like I was a hero, and I wanted to be worthy of that look." "You were worthy," Georgia said. "You are worthy. You saved my life, Austin Thorne." "No," Austin said, pulling her close. "You saved mine. Before you, I was just drifting, going from job to job with no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to be better, to build something, to put down roots. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. You saved me, Georgia, in every way that matters." They kissed, there on the porch with their grandchildren playing and the sun setting over their land, and Georgia felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time Austin kissed her all those years ago. They lived to see all their grandchildren grown. They lived to see the ranch pass into James's capable hands. They lived to see Daniel become a respected lawyer in Dallas. They lived to see Emma expand the horse business into 3 states. Austin died first, at 72, of a heart that finally wore out after a life of hard work. He died in their bed with Georgia holding his hand, and his last words were, "I love you." Georgia felt like part of her soul had been ripped away, but she took comfort in knowing that they had been together for almost 50 years, that not a single day had been wasted. Georgia lived for 5 more years after Austin's death. She stayed on the ranch, helping with the grandchildren, telling stories about the old days, about the midnight train and the cowboy who saved her. When she died at 77, it was peacefully in her sleep, and her children and grandchildren gathered to mourn her. They buried her next to Austin on a hill overlooking their ranch. The headstone was simple: Georgia Novak Thorne, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. But on Austin's headstone, Georgia had insisted on an inscription before she died. Austin Thorne, the man who rode the midnight train. Years later, the great-grandchildren would ask about that inscription, and their parents and grandparents would tell them the story. About how their great-grandmother had been sent away on the midnight train, and how their great-grandfather had boarded it and rode back with her. About how that one act of courage and love had created a family, a legacy, a life that had touched so many people. And the great-grandchildren would listen with wide eyes and ask if it was really true, if people really could be that brave, if love really could change everything. And they would be told yes. Yes, it was all true. Yes, people could be that brave. Yes, love could change everything. Because Georgia and Austin Thorne had proved it. That night on the midnight train, and every day after for the rest of their lives. They had taken fear and turned it into courage, had taken nothing and built everything, had taken a chance meeting on a train and turned it into a love story for the ages. Their ranch still stood, run now by the 4th generation of Thornes, and visitors would sometimes ask about the history of the place. And the family would always tell the story with pride. This was the ranch built by Georgia Novak and Austin Thorne, who met on a midnight train in 1882, and loved each other until their dying days. It was a story about courage and conviction, about standing up for what was right even when it cost everything. But most of all, it was a story about love, the kind of love that risks everything, that builds something from nothing, that lasts beyond death into legend. The kind of love that begins when a cowboy sees a frightened girl on a midnight train and decides that some things are worth fighting for. The kind of love that grows through hardship and triumph, through children and grandchildren, through 50 years of waking up together and going to sleep in each other's arms. The kind of love that never really ends because it lives on in the land they built together, in the family they created, in the story that would be told for generations. Georgia and Austin Thorne, who proved that love could conquer anything, even a midnight train carrying someone away from everything they knew. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to board that train, to ride back with you, to stand by your side no matter what comes. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that one person becomes your whole world, your partner, your home. That was the legacy of Georgia and Austin Thorne. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but proof that real love, true love, the kind that matters, is built on a foundation of courage, trust, and the willingness to risk everything for the person who holds your heart. They had found each other in the darkness of a midnight train, and they had brought each other into the light. And that light had never dimmed, not for 50 years, not even now that they were both gone. It shone on in their descendants, in the land they had loved, in the story that would never be forgotten. The story of the girl on the midnight train and the cowboy who saved her, and how that moment of courage had created something beautiful and lasting and true.